Hello and welcome back. This is Arla Smith, the Disaster Communications Manager for Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. Today I have Isaac Morris and Jessica Foutch with us. We're going to be talking about some landlord and tenant rights during and after a disaster. Just a little background information on Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. We do serve all 77 counties in Oklahoma. We handle all civil legal matters that come across our table. Unfortunately, we do not do anything for criminal law. We do assist those who are within the 200% of poverty and below on the federal guidelines. We do have 19 offices in multiple embedded locations that we provide our attorneys in and serve our communities. But today, Isaac Morris and Jessica Foutch, our two disaster staff attorneys, will be talking to you about landlord and tenant rights and going from there. So hello.
Thanks, Arla.
Hello. Thanks for having us again.
Welcome back to What a Disaster.
Yeah. Glad to be here. It's a privilege.
Yes.
What a disaster.
Thank you for that information about legal aid. You're right. We do civil legal services for low-income and elderly Oklahomans. We've got grants for people who are low income, and we also have some that specialize for elderly people. We are a special part of the disaster team with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. We've got offices all over, but we're here in Sapulpa at our specialized disaster office. We've got a big mobile intake unit, all kinds of things here where we house our disaster preparedness information. Landlord tenant, I think, is a big topic we're going to chat on now. Isaac, what do you see the most when it comes to landlord tenant issues related to disaster?
I think the biggest thing is a landlord not repairing the unit or the home in a timely manner. That's probably the biggest issue. It's not that they won't. Unfortunately, we do have some pretty bad landlords that won't repair or replace anything. But a lot of times it's they're not getting to it in time. That's a difficult question,
Right?
And it's hard to force people's hands to do so. So
that's the difficult part with landlord tenant is we can give our notices, we can do what we've got to do statutorily, but you can't force someone to make repairs. So that is, part of the landlord-tenant relationship.
Yeah.
Usually, your landlord's going to be responsible for most repairs, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Obviously, it comes down to the contract.
Right.
So getting into landlord-tenant, I think the first thing we've got to do in analyzing what your claim is. I mean, again, this isn't legal advice. We're just talking generalities. But I think the first thing is we've got to look at that contract and see what the landlord-tenant relationship looks like on paper.
Yep.
There are guidelines, Oklahoma laws that govern that relationship. Usually a landlord's going to be responsible to keep the place habitable, the place in working order, major systems working, those kind of things. What else have we seen in disaster?
I mean, I think just kind of expanding on that before looking at other issues is we talk about the landlord's duties. There are, of course, the tenant's duties, which I think we'll get into more in depth later. But do want to say, biggest thing I always say for landlord tenant is notice. Like you mentioned notice. You can do those things. We can't force people's hands, which is true. But for your rights to kick in per se, you need to give notice of
what kind of notice?
Written.
And it's not a text message notice either. It has to be in writing, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a text is probably the last resort. Or maybe a text to say, hey, I confirm I sent you an email, or I dropped off a handwritten note. But yeah, written notice to the landlord is required, to kind of kickstart all those rights.
Right.
So I think that's an important duty. And two, I think it's important to say you as a tenant, you also have an obligation to mitigate damages. Which is an obligation in insurance, but also just as a tenant, you should try to prevent any further damage to the unit or to the home.
Right. And that's what you mean by mitigate.
Right. So those just kind of things I want to tack on to that. But other issues we see could be, either not doing it or not doing it in a timely manner, or I guess do it in an effective manner if they do it at all.
Right.
Or if the relationship is so strained, sometimes it's unfortunate. The best option is to relocate, which I know it's not always the best it's not always financially feasible for some.
Right.
So that's when you have to leverage our relationships with nonprofits and see what we can do to get them in the best situation.
So what are the landlords? I mean, I understand that the landlord is supposed to maintain the home. That's their responsibility. It's their home. As far as maintaining, if the roof is leaking, if there's water damage due to pipes, things along those lines. What other things do the landlords need to do to make sure that they're maintaining their end of their contract as well?
Well, I think we'd have to read the contract.
Generally, like you said earlier, I mean, they have to maintain the common areas. They have to supply, those essential services. Something generally we haven't said, which we need to come out and say clearly, I guess. The landlord is responsible for the structure of the unit or the home, whereas the tenant is responsible for the contents, and that's where it comes into you should have renters insurance, and see our other podcasts on insurance.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's kind of something clearly, kind of a 100-foot view. Structure is a landlord's responsibility, and the contents is the tenant's. Although the tenant shouldn't intentionally or negligently damage the structure. If they do, then that's where it could be the tenant's responsibility.
Right.
That's kind of in the weeds, but that's something just want to be clear about.
Absolutely. So yes, I think that is a big thing, is being a renter. Part of your portion duty. I mean, you don't have an absolute duty to carry insurance, but for your own personal protection, renters need their own insurance. So yeah, I mean, I think they've got to, again, just kind of recapping, keep it habitable, keep the major systems moving, water, sewage, air, heat, those kind of things, prevent water intrusion. I think those are kind of the landlord's duties. And the tenant, again, though, that's a big thing, is written notice. And the situation that a lot of times these people are in at the time of the disaster, them going home to print off a letter for their landlord is not usually going to be feasible. They may not even have access to that technology. And if they did, it could very well be gone, damaged, destroyed. So that is, again, kind of why we specialize it with the low income folks, is they're going to be the ones that need more assistance. During this, they can come to us, and that's something we can help get them some kind of notice to their landlord. They could even pick it up at like our local office, or we could ensure that people get these documents in the time of need. You had mentioned the MARCs, the multi-agency resource centers, things like that. Is post-disaster, even if you are a renter, going to those recovery centers is vital, because there are a lot of resources that are out there for renters that you otherwise are not going to know exist, like the Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency. Post-disaster, they offer relocation assistance, things like that. So, I mean, really just staying abreast of what your resources are. And even if, because a lot of people are thinking, well, I'm a renter, I don't need to go up to this center. I don't own my house. Well, there's still resources for you, or can be.
Yeah. Some else, I think another issue just popped up was we see as, I guess, two separate issues. One, there's a question of, do I still need to pay my rent if your unit's been destroyed or damaged? And the answer is yes. You need, of course, you can work with your landlord to try to negotiate, say, hey, I can only pay this much, pay half. That can happen, and of course, we can help facilitate that if needed. But the second thing is the return of a deposit is another issue I think we see a lot of. If you're to relocate, especially because, of course, some landlords could say, well, it's damaged. Well, it wasn't damaged by me. It was damaged by the storm. Oklahoma law requires you to request your deposit within 6 months of leaving the unit or the home, and of course do that in writing. But that's an issue we see a lot of, and that we can help with as well if they're unwilling to return that, or don't provide an accounting, because that's something else that is required. You have to provide an accounting of of what they use the funds for, if they use any.
Right. There's a whole statutory layout of
Right.
landlord-tenant law. So,
Yep.
I mean, we could dive into
Yeah.
there's a lot of
There is.
like nuanced requirements when it comes to notice and things like that. So, I mean, again, that's just where an attorney can help guide you through that process in your housing. Then you get to a point, let's say you've had your storm, you're a renter, you've given notice to your landlord. The next step, in theory, should be the landlord fixing the property. But we sometimes, like you said, the biggest issue we see is that not happening or
Right.
that not happening in a timely
Yeah.
manner. And again, it's difficult. We can tell people to go and fix the property,
Yeah.
but perhaps the owner didn't have insurance on
Yep.
it, or there are occasions where there may not be funds to fix
Yep.
the structure.
Yep.
And so that's when a good request for a deposit back
Yep.
would be helpful.
So if the tenant does have to move and they request their deposit back, is there a time frame that deposit should essentially be returned to them?
Yeah, they do have to respond to you in a certain amount of time. And then if not, there's another process you can go through to follow up with that.
And as far as their deposit goes, it kind of makes me feel like we need to kind of back up before the disaster. The tenant should probably do the same thing homeowners do. Video, take pictures of the home before the disaster hits to help with
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Do inventory, because especially if they have renters insurance, and even if they don't, the other nonprofits, they could help, you replace your personal property, big items, furniture, fridge, smaller items. They can also help if your car was damaged, they can help you, replace, or fix your car. So yeah.
And so if something happens and the tenant's home is destroyed and the landlord says, well, it's not safe for you to go back into the home right now, how is that tenant supposed to obtain their property that would have been left inside that home?
That's a very good question and a complicated answer. I'll let my colleague Jessica handle it, 'cause she's much more versed than I am.
No, I was going to say.
Seek an attorney would be the best answer.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Need an advocate.
Absolutely need an advocate. That is, I mean, at this point, we're balancing safety issues with our personal property. So in the event that an expert, an engineer, someone, a contractor has come in and deemed the home truly dangerous and not just uninhabitable, but unaccessible due to the damage,
Right.
I think then we can't very well, and then this is just off the top of my head, I think this is not direct legal advice. Every person's situation is going to be different, but you can't very well just barge in there. I mean, you're opening yourself up to a lot of issues. If it truly is deemed dangerous or a hazard, but at the same time, we're balancing the fact with you need your clothes, you need your personal property to the extent anything remains.
Right.
So, I mean, I really think every situation is going to be a case-by-case analysis as to, is it truly dangerous to enter? And I think making connection with that landlord, the property managers, their experts, their attorneys at that point to figure out a plan of action would be necessary. Because there's got to be some kind of give and take in this situation and balance to it.
Right. And I think something also kind of say, like, stepping back, is typically these issues arise whenever the landlord-tenant relationship is already strained. If it's not strained, then a lot of these issues don't arise. Like if the items are inaccessible rather, and but you need them, you can kind of work out with your landlord, with the attorneys and the experts to get it. But if it's a strained relationship, that's when you're, again, going to need an advocate to say, hey, y'all are on good terms, but these are her rights. These are her rights. So yeah. So I think, again, we're kind of looking at it in a sense of like, a lot of these issues arise when it's a strained relationship. And unfortunately, sometimes, again, like we said earlier, that can lead to you get what you can or get what is yours, and then you need to relocate, But again, kind of contextualizing, as always in like usually strained relationships, lead to more issues.
Yeah.
So if you're on good terms, you can usually work it out amongst yourselves.
Right.
Ideally.
And I guess the difficult part, I would say, becomes most of the time we see people who are renting, most of them don't have a huge nest egg to turn around and pay another deposit.
Yes.
So that's very true, that the relationship with the landlord can make or break a post-disaster recovery, given some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a disaster, it's not just the renter at that point that's out of pocket for some stuff too, because the landlord's home suffered damage. Even if it's being their second home, it's still their property. So they're both facing, costs to replace things from the damage.
That's a very good point. In a disaster, even though there are hierarchical kind of orders, everyone, no matter what, is still going through a recovery process. So it's important to keep in mind, that, I think it should cause us to be more patient and gracious with folks, to be like, we're all recovering from the same storm, we're all trying to come together. And from our perspective, when we come into a community, we need to keep that in mind as well of everyone's kind of rebuilding and trying to get back to a sense of normal and what does that look like now? And so I think just keep that in mind and kind of continue to be gracious with folks. And still, of course, we're still going to advocate passionately and zealously as we should, but within that context.
Right.
If a disaster hits and my electric is still on and I'm still paying for that service and the home is not habitable, what should I do with that electric service? Should I call them? Should I suspend it? What would be the best option?
That's a very good question, and actually quite nuanced. Again, every scenario is going to be different for every person. You should know that if you have housing benefits, and I've seen this just recently in a case we've got, if you have federal housing benefits, a lot of times you are required to have heat, air, electric, those things. I have seen landlords cancel, evict, and cancel subsidies based upon the lack of electricity, and even right after a storm. So truly, again, I think it comes back to, we have got to get an expert involved. We need to see, is there electrical wires hanging from the from the ceiling? Can we see the damage? I think a lot of it is going to be figuring out what the experts say as far as, is it safe to even have the electricity on? Electricity and water don't mix.
Right.
So, you've got a water intrusion problem, and your electricity's on, it can be a danger. But if you go and just shut it off, they can turn around and say, well, you turned your electricity off. We're going to evict you. And we've seen it happen post-disaster.
So with that being said, every situation is different. Every person has a different situation, obviously. So we're going to keep going on that. If they do file an eviction, what should our tenants expect in an eviction process?
The most important thing to do if you receive notice that you're being evicted is to show up at court.
Yes.
That is hands down the most important thing. Technically, the small claims court does not require technically a written answer to a small claims petition in the eviction proceeding. Your showing up to court is usually sufficient or, is sufficient. However, you want to contact an attorney, see if somebody can show up at court with you. You want to make sure you take all of your evidence. You want to try and get, like I said, an attorney as quickly as possible so that we can try and stave off any other, alleged damages or issues with the landlord. So show up is the absolute most important thing you can do if you're facing eviction, and get legal counsel.
Okay. So for legal aid purposes, if you do need any assistance, you can always go on to legalaidok.org for legal assistance. That is our home website. For our disaster team, we do have www.oklahomadisasterlegalhelp.org. Through there, you can find more information about landlord-tenant rights during and after a disaster. And from there, you can also apply online. Same with legalaidok.org. You can apply online through that website, or you can call either one of the application line or the disaster hotline numbers to get assistance as well. Just a quick reminder on that.
And thank you. Eviction in the disaster context is, it doesn't look good, a homeowner going in front of a judge and immediately evicting someone post a disaster. So, I feel like the post-disaster eviction process, there are times where eviction process is what it is. If you don't pay your rent for months, you are going to be evicted.
Right.
There's no defense to I haven't paid my rent in 3 months, generally. But post-disaster, we've been able to find resources. This has happened, post-disaster eviction, and we've went and found resources. I've had Catholic Charities pay months of rent to hold off the eviction process. So it is difficult. If you're behind, you need to try and find the resources to get the rent paid. And again, post-disaster, we can try and find some resources for you.
I think there is some more grace given, landlords. Again, if you're on good terms, typically we're more willing to work with you. If you're on good terms and you're saying, hey, I just been hit, work is, I'm on a job now, or whatever the case may be, they're more willing to work with you. And there are those resources. You still access those resources while you're given, a trial period, forbearance period, but it's good to keep that in mind as well.
And then also those resources, a lot of them are available at the multi-agency or the recovery centers that we host with Oklahoma Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. So that could be a really good spot for anybody who, experience a disaster, kind of keep an eye out. Of course, we do have to be asked to come in to go to those after disaster events. So the counties usually ask us to come in and help. But at that point, they can find resources to help us.
I've never seen an eviction proceeding, and I say never, but I'll say seldom do you see an eviction proceeding between a landlord and a tenant who have a great relationship.
Right.
A lot of the landlord-tenant does come down to the relationship between the parties, which is difficult because then there's a whole lot of opens up a whole nother can of worms of fair housing and what's that relationship look like. But the biggest thing is show up at a hearing if it's gone to an eviction process. And if you find yourself in that scenario, you need a call for some legal help. And us or a private attorney.
And just a reminder, Jessica does also help with our fair housing team. So she does have a pretty good knowledge when it comes to the landlord-tenant information. So I just like to throw that out there. So is there anything else you think that our landlords and tenants should know?
Yes, actually. Yes. So I do want to add real quick. Again, going back to the importance of showing up and being there to advocate for yourself in an eviction proceeding. Evictions can go and haunt you for years to come. So what I mean by that is when you're trying to rent at the next location, they're very likely to pull your rental history. And when they see that you have a recent eviction or an eviction at all, for that matter, in some circumstances, it's really going to play against you. And so it's almost cyclical, is once you get down and then you get evicted, and then it just hurts you further. So we see this in the housing context of when you get kicked down, it's hard to get back up because then you've got an eviction on your record. And it's hard to overcome those things to find new housing. So just remember, to the extent we can prevent those things, we're here.
And also, one thing I do want to add to that is remember when you are going to an eviction hearing, you are going to court. You need to remember to dress like you are going to court, because sometimes showing up in clothes that are not appropriate to be worn to court can cause difficult issues too.
It's very important to be professional, respectful, in all manners, in speech and in conduct and in attire. Yes.
Yes. Show up court ready. Do not show up showing off
Additional
stomachs, shoulders, body parts. Show up dressed and ready to represent yourself in an appropriate fashion.
Show up dressed like you're going to a job interview. Be the best.
And do not speak unless your attorney tells you to speak. Turn off your phone. If we're getting into this, we're going to jump in and I'm just going to turn off your phone. Do not let your phone ring 4 times and the judge have to ask you to leave his courtroom. I will stare you down. You will not only hear me complain, but you're also going to hear the judge complain. So there are some things we have to be polite when we show up. We generally are not going to speak until we're spoken to when we get into the court hearing. You're going to let your attorney talk for you unless your attorney looks at you and tells you to talk. So the big thing is, if you have an attorney, you just show up and you follow their lead.
Right.
But yes, show up looking prepared, feeling prepared. Once you get into the hearing, there's a couple circumstances that will happen. Most small claims courts, more rural counties are going to require you to have some kind of mediation with the other party, exchange of evidence and things like that before an actual contested hearing before the judge. So oftentimes we find ourselves with the early settlement people discussing, discussing possible solutions, etc. So there is that process. And so be prepared to show up and maybe have a chance to try and work it out. The judge, and then, to the extent that it is necessary, a contested hearing will be held. Especially if someone's trying, if they're adamant that they want to evict and you don't agree, then we're going to probably go in front of a judge and we're going to plead our case. And at that time, the judge will make a determination as to what the law is and what they deem to be the appropriate next steps. And you will usually get an order from the judge in your hearing telling you what happened and what they've determined. So if the judge determines that, you are being evicted, you need to move out in the time designated in the order. If you're not out timely, they can go and get a writ and kick you out. So it's important. And the big thing is to have your personal property out. If you know this process is coming, to start having your things ready, start having an idea of what you're going to do, because they can order you to exit the home. And a lot of times, the reality of it is, unless you have a legal argument to keep you into the place, a lot of times you're not gonna, if once you get to that eviction process, the relationship is usually so strained that there's no turning back. So working up to that, you need to be prepared for a judgment against you.
Yes.
In all cases, start planning now.
Start packing, start thinking of where you're going to go and resources available, start, kind of applying and looking into that.
Absolutely. Because they can order, I've seen a judge order people out by 5 p.m. that day. That's on the lesser frequent things. Usually they're going to be gracious and give them some time, especially in the post-disaster context. But yeah, so just that's a big thing, is being prepared and knowing what can happen at the end of that day. And that is that you are likely going to be looking for new housing. And if you're not evicted, I do go back to the relationship, and as strained as it is, a lot of times I just say, if somebody's trying to evict you, we probably need to be looking
Yeah.
for safe and secure housing elsewhere, because if they're trying to evict now, they might try again in 6 months, and we might be fighting this very same battle.
Right.
So good relationships, honest, open communication with your landlord's probably best.
Yeah.
If you're going to court, dress appropriately, listen to your attorney. If you do not have one, seek one. Again, you can do that through legal aid. You can do that through Oklahoma Bar Association if you make a little bit more than what legal aid is able to help with. Anything else that we kind of need to?
So if you find yourself in the eviction process in a post-disaster situation, you need to make sure you've got the photos, things like that, because I have seen post-disaster landlords seeking disaster damages from the tenant when they otherwise wouldn't be responsible for those. Now, if you destroy the bedroom and the walls therein and the lights, and it needs an entire new paint job, and the disaster only hit the living room, you still could be liable for some damages. So again, it's a case-by-case analysis, but make sure you go with your evidence too.
So take care of your home that you're staying in, regardless whether it's yours or somebody else's.
Yeah.
Take care of your property. You're staying in somebody else's home. You take care of it like you would take care of your own property. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. If you have any questions or need any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us through oklahomadisasterlegalhelp.org or through legalaidok.org, and we'd be happy to follow up with that.